Afternoon. Quite excited to have you with us. Thank you for taking out the time to listen in on how you could further your implementation of Accelerated Reader or ensure that you have a good implementation in place. I've been with Renaissance Learning for just on 10 years and spent 6 of those years in the implementation team, getting schools up and running with the software, and more recently I've moved over to our Renaissance School Partnership team where we're assisting and supporting schools to raise their literacy levels and have a solid implementation in place with Accelerated Reader. So thank you again for your time. Some of you may have just joined us, so Terry may have introduced you to some of the tools we'll be using for today's webinar. We want this to be an interactive webinar, so we may call on you to give us some feedback as we go through everything. We do have a full team on board. We've got Terry Burr assisting with any technical issues, which she'll support you on using the chat that's available. And we also have Jessamy Hunter, who will be feeding back to any queries you might have or questions you might have through the chat box. Right, so let's get on with today's presentation. So before we go through the material, I'd like to guide you through the webinar on which tools we'll be using. As I said earlier, some of you may be quite familiar with some of the emoticons that are available or forms of feedback that can be used. So to the right-hand side of your screen, you'll find the attendee list. And if you scroll through the attendee list, you're likely to find your name within the list. Below, just below our attendee list, you'll find some emoticons. You'll see your raise hand option, the tick, the cross, and the smiley face. So if you're ready to go for today's training session, could I ask you to give me a nice green tick? It just helps me to know that you can all locate that on your screen. Great, I'm seeing lots of ticks come through. Fantastic. If anybody's needing assistance, Terry will be there to help you with that. We also have the raise hand option. Now, towards the end of the webinar, we will cover any queries or any general questions that you might have, so we could use this raise hand option to allow you to let us know that you have a question on hand. So we will come back to that later on. I might also open up mics and use the raise hand emoticon for that. Lastly, we have the smiley faces. So if you use that drop-down menu, could you please let me know how you're feeling today? I know there's been lots of rain, so you might not be feeling all that happy about the rain, but maybe think about the upcoming summer break that's a few weeks away and give me a smiley face or emoticon to let me know how you're feeling about that. Well, Tony's feeling a little bit sleepy as it is the end of the day, and I can imagine it's quite a long way to go still. Right, I'm seeing some faces come through. Within the options of the smiley faces, you'll also find a coffee cup, and if you put that coffee cup up, it will let us know that you might be stepping away from your screen for that time. Great, I do see some smiley faces. Great, some happy faces. Fantastic, thank you. Lastly, you may have also discovered the chat box. Please ensure that this is set to send to all participants. So if you are sending through any messages, set that on all participants, and Terry or Jessamy will be able to assist you. Fantastic. So our material today will cover the 10 best classroom practices, and we'll go into that in a short while. Just before we do, to get an idea of where everybody's at with Accelerated Reader, could you let me know or let us know via the chat whether you've been using Accelerated Reader for a while or whether you're altogether new to it, and we'll do so using a scale of 1 to 5. And if you could type a 1 into the chat box, anything between 1 and 5, 1 being that you know very little about the software, or that you're fairly new to Accelerated Reader, and 5 indicating that you're quite confident with the software or that you have been using it for a number of years. I'm seeing a few 1s come through, 4s, 3s, 2s, 3. Right, fantastic. So we're seeing quite a mix. Lots of 3s coming through. Thank you for your feedback. Thank you for that. Right. So I'm trusting that with today's training session, you'll find something new to take away with you today, and hopefully in part will help you as you nod through it, go, yes, we're doing that, we're on track with this bit of the implementation, and then looking at how you could move it forward. Now, 10 best practices that we'll be covering are the fundamental steps to ensure that you have an effective implementation of Accelerated Reader in place. These steps are split up into 3 phases, and the first is getting started and getting up and running with the software. Phase 2 would be to establish routines and monitor progress. So that's the bit that you'll be doing in class as the teacher participant to using the software. The final phase is to diagnose problems, set targets, and to keep your students motivated. And we're going to start off by looking at understanding star reading and Accelerated Reader. It's important that not only all your staff know how the software works, but that your students are also aware of what they need to do in the software and become quite independent with using the quizzes, choosing their books as well. To briefly touch on how these programs work together, star reading is your assessment tool. So we always refer to going on to star reading to take your test or your assessment, which is done once a term. And star reading gives you your baseline reading for Accelerated Reader. So it provides you with that well-known ZPD range, allowing you to see which books you need to start your students off with and then guide them through their levels. So we're going from star to Accelerated Reader. Once your students have been successfully reading and quizzing with Accelerated Reader, maybe after a term has passed, you'll then be getting them back onto star reading to assess growth and progress. So you're moving between these 2 products over the duration of the academic year. Students will be using Accelerated Reader and the quizzing side of the software throughout the year, and they'll come back to take a star assessment at least once a term. So from star reading, we have that all-important zone of proximal development. And the zone of proximal development identifies the books at which, well, the books that your students will be reading that will be most suitable for them at that point in time. So at the point that they've taken the star reading test, you give them those levels, and it helps to guide them to books that they can comfortably read through with sufficient challenge. It's important that students do read throughout the ZPD range, but we often recommend that they start towards the lower end of the range. And if you look at the example in the presentation, you can easily see that at the lower end of the range, we're not looking at the books that are too easy, but they lean towards the easier, more manageable books for your students. And by starting them off at this level, they will have instant success with Accelerated Reader if they read the book from cover to cover and they read it well, and it's a manageable length for the student at that point in time. You should be seeing a good result, a pass coming through on the quiz, and hopefully an 80 or 90% or 100% pass in the results. This will give them the motivation to then want to move on to the next book. You then have the option of gradually guiding them throughout the ZPD range, or encouraging them to read slightly longer text to stretch their comprehension. It's important that students are reading within their ZPD range for 70% of the time. If they're reading within the ZPD range for 70% of the books that they're selecting, you should see the success coming through. The 30% that we allow for outside of the ZPD range could come up where students are reading books within a series, and you may find that the next book within that series could be at a slightly higher book level towards the end of the range or outside the range, or slightly lower down. So you may allow for those exceptions. You may also find that a student could be supporting another student who's reading at a slightly lower level, and they both would like to quiz on that book. So if you have any systems in school where you have paired reading and you've got students reading together, they could both then go on to quiz on the book, and in those cases the book could be slightly lower down on the ZPD range. But it's ensuring that for majority of the time they are accessing books within the range. When looking at the quiz results, you want to ensure that students are meeting the targets that have been set within the software. And to support them in this, you may need to make adjustments and guide them to appropriate books within that ZPD range. So if they are reaching too far up within that range, and the results are showing that they're failing quizzes. At this point in time, you may need to redirect your students to either a shorter book or a book lower down on that ZPD range. Likewise, if they're having constant success, hitting lots of 100%, you may need to say, right, let's challenge you a little bit further. Let's find a book at a slightly higher book level. Let's try a longer book, or let's look at a classic book. So ensuring that students are meeting the right level of challenge that they can have that growth come through. So what we've done in terms of the ZPD range, and as I've noted, the ZPD range are the book levels that you've been guiding your students to. We've taken the test papers within school as of last academic year and run them through our ATOS analyzer. What our ATOS analyzer does is it scans every single page within the book, and it reads every single word on every page. It looks at the average sentence length, average word length, and difficulty level of individual words. Then takes that information and puts it through an algorithm which gives us the readability levels or book levels for accelerated reader. When you're starting off with the software and you're introducing accelerated reader, it is important again that both your staff and your students know what a book level is, what the points are, and what the interest levels are of those books, so that they can select books accordingly. When we've run these test papers through our ATOS analyzer, you can see that they are coming up quite high. When looking at the GCSE results and you're looking at English language and English literacy, you're looking at levels of anything between 6.4 up to 8.9. And to put this into perspective, when students have taken the STAR reading test, the highest reading age that you'll have would be 16 years and 6 months. That's the highest that the system will give you. And your ZPD range would be 5 to 13. When looking at these ranges, a lot of the adult novels are written at an average book level of 5.0, and this is adult fiction novel. So it's not to say that we cannot read up to book levels of 13, but when we're selecting books to read for pleasure, they're likely to be around a 5 or 6 book level. So your non-fiction and your academic text will come up at these higher levels that we're seeing for the GCSE exams. When you consider, if you've used Accelerated Reader for a while, I'm sure you've looked at those STAR results time and time again, and when you look at your students' ZPD ranges and the levels that they're reading at, you may find that there's a bit of a gap between the levels they're accessing and having success at and the GCSE exams. So to ensure that our students are ready for these exams, we need to look at what's expected, look at where our students are at, and consider plans and initiatives to put in place to close that gap between their reading ages and their chronological ages, and try to get them as close to the expected levels for the exams that they'll be facing. Something that can assist with this is to introduce non-fiction text. If you haven't yet introduced non-fiction text, do consider identifying which of the books in your school have quizzes that have non-fiction books, because we do quiz on a high majority of non-fiction text as well. And start to introduce this to your students and have them quiz on it, and again build their confidence in their reading levels and to lift up their levels as they quiz with Accelerated Reader. Could I ask at this point to please give me a tick if your students are quizzing on non-fiction books, or if you have labeled and matched your non-fiction books, and give me a cross if that's not happened as yet. Just out of interest, and I'm aware that there are many schools that we have out there that have not considered the non-fiction text. We're getting a sort of a 50-50 response coming through, some saying no, some saying yes. There's still some responses coming through. Well, thank you for your feedback. If you've entered that in already, a tick or cross for yes or no. Right, some are typing, fantastic. We can see yes, we have, but there's not much variant of non-fiction lower levels. Right, have matched but not gone right at the moment. Fantastic. We can see a short page, please. Okay, fantastic. Okay, Jessamy has shared the AR Book Find website, and it's a great resource to search for text, non-fiction text that is available. And there's a mention of there being not much non-fiction available for the lower levels. By using AR Book Finder and specifying those levels, searching for non-fiction, hopefully you'll find a wider range of non-fiction text. But hopefully it's a good opportunity to think about introducing the non-fiction text, and possibly encouraging your students to quiz on a non-fiction book once a half term, possibly once they've done a fiction novel, to then quiz on a non-fiction novel. Okay, some are commenting saying we have looked at AR Book Finder, but there are not many non-fiction books below ZPDs for middle years. Okay. What I can suggest as well is if you have a trainer go through that with you. If you have any upcoming training sessions, mention the fact that you're seeking non-fiction text. They will be able to give you guidance. What I'd like to highlight on the screen as well is that you'll see our What Kids Are Reading report, a page from the What Kids Are Reading report, which is produced annually. And when your students go online to quiz, they should be rating the quizzes, voting on the quizzes, and we take this information to produce our What Kids Are Reading report. And you can see the example on screen actually gives you the 20 most read non-fiction, or most often quizzed on non-fiction books by year 7. And we'll give you the ranking and how that's changed. The What Kids Are Reading report will also give you lots of additional information in terms of books for girls, books for boys, and it covers it year by year. So Terry will share that with you after our training session of our webinar today. You will have access to the What Kids Are Reading report to scan through some ideas for non-fiction books. I'm noting that a few of our participants today are saying that they're struggling for non-fiction text. For the lower ability students, we will send out some ideas and some, another fun fact series is one that you can consider, but we will share some series that you could consider to introduce to your students. Right, we will share that with you and let you know of some of these series that you can consider. The What Kids Are Reading website has been put into the chat box, so if you click onto it, you should be able to save the web page to access the annual report. Thank you for all your feedback. I know that Jess is coming back to you, and so is Terry with some support for any questions you have. We're now going to do an activity using the whiteboard. You should have, on the top left-hand corner of your screen, you should have a little arrow that you can click onto. If you click onto your arrow and click on the screen, it should appear on screen, so you can go ahead and do so now. Thanks. If your pointer comes up as yellow, you may want to change the color because the text will then also appear as yellow. So to change that color, simply go up to the color box where you found the pointer, use the drop-down menu, and change it from yellow to a different color. What we're going to look at now, as we've discussed the ZPD range, is how you would prepare your students to choose appropriate books. So how do you share out that ZPD range, and how would you ensure that your students know their ZPD range and that they're accessing books within that range? So if you can go ahead and type alongside your arrow. Once you've typed in your feedback, you will need to click off or click elsewhere on the screen for the text to appear. If you're unable to locate the pointer, you're welcome to also type your feedback into the chat box down below. I'm getting a lot of pointers coming up on the screen, so if you're more comfortable with the chat box, you're welcome to use the chat box. So just in brief, how are you distributing your ZPD ranges? How are you ensuring that students know these ranges and that they are accessing books within their ZPD range? Now, once you've typed your text, click elsewhere on the screen so that the text will appear. Students have a color-coded bookmark and the librarian works with us. I can't see the rest of it, but I'm assuming that you work together with the librarian to ensure that students are reading within the range. The bookmarks are really good. some are new to accelerated reader, so they don't have anything in place as yet. Planners are coming through as an option. Planners are good. Diaries, colored stickers on the books and the pupil diaries. Logbooks, using the students' interests as well as their ZPD. Fantastic. ZPD is shared along with reading aid after STAR test, or put in their reading logs. Great. As you know, with the STAR reading test, your students will not see their results after the test. So it's up to you to decide on what information you're wanting to share with the students and what stage. The most important bit of information you need to share is the ZPD range, but Sarah's mentioned that they also share the reading ages with their students. The ZPD is shared with students through one-to-one chats, fantastic, and recorded in the school planner. The conversation with your students is also very important, Angela. Feedback from STAR and quizzes, colored dots on books. Yep, the labeling of the books is really important in terms of allowing your students to feel quite independent in selecting their books. Color-coded books given to students on paper. Books under ZPD, great. So it seems as though a lot of our participants in schools are following the suggestions that we put forward in the initial training, which would be to color code the books so that students can easily find those books within their ZPD range, and then to have a bookmark, a reading log, a diary, a planner, somewhere where that ZPD range is recorded so that students always have easy access to the ZPD range. Thank you so much for your valuable feedback. Apologies if your text hasn't appeared. You may just need to click off or click elsewhere on the screen and then the text will appear. But thank you for the feedback that we've had thus far. I hope that the ideas that have been shared, if you haven't yet started to use any reading logs or pass on your ZPD range, that you can take something away with you that would work well for you in your school. Moving on to the third best practice, which is timetabling daily reading practice. What I'd like to do here is find out, I'm going to just open up a poll and find out how often are your students, or how much time are your students given in their timetable to read independently. So on the right-hand side of your screen, you'll find a poll with few options. If you can select A, B, C, or D, so you have less than 15 minutes of engaged time or reading time set aside in your timetable, 15 to 24 minutes, C as 25 to 34 minutes, or more than 34 minutes. So that's timetabled for reading. I can see those responses coming through. Thank you. I'll leave it another 20 seconds and we can get a few more responses. So how much time is timetabled for reading? Okay, just 5 seconds and then I'll be closing the poll. Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm just going to close that poll and then we'll view the results together. So reading time is a really important part of Accelerated Reader. Let's see what feedback we have. Majority have said that 15 to 24 minutes is what has been scheduled into the timetable. We have 21% that have responded saying less than 15 minutes and 7% saying more than 25 minutes. 8 saying more than 34 minutes, which is quite impressive, and the majority at 37% have said 15 to 24 minutes of engaged reading time. Now I've asked that question because we have run a study with over 2 million students that has looked into how much time do we need to give our students to ensure that we'll see growth in their reading practice. And I'm going to share those results with you, but if you need to, I just need to mention that if you need to access your chat box on the right-hand side of the screen, either close down the poll, X out of the poll, or in the top right-hand corner of the screen, you'll see a drop-down menu where you can click onto it and click onto Restore Layout, and that will bring back the chat box. So guided independent reading is really important, and we've got a study that we've produced. From this study, we've had students sit down, read for a set amount of time per day, and assessed their progress before and after they've read for that time. We've noticed that when students are reading for less than 15 minutes per day, you'll find that there will be, the results will fall back, and you'll see some regression taking place or very slow growth. The minute students start reading for between 15 and 24 minutes per day, you'll start to see the growth happen. So there's quite a big jump there. But the greatest gains are found between 25 and 34 minutes of daily reading practice. Hence, we suggest the 30 minutes, the timetable 30 minutes of daily reading practice to ensure that you can have a minimum of 25 minutes out of that time. If students are reading for more than 34 minutes, you still have some growth happening, a little bit more, but it tends to plateau and then drop down again. So your sweet spot really falls between the 25 and 34 minutes of daily reading practice. Reading is like any other activity that your students might be doing in school, any other sport. The more time and practice they put in to doing their reading, the better they will get at it. And you can use accelerated reader quizzes to assess that. You can also use your star reading results just to view that growth and view that progress. So that is really, really important. And it's like any other muscle that you'll be building. The more time and practice you put into it, the stronger it will become. So that would be a recommendation, and Jess or Terry will be sharing the study with you so you can access the information from the study to share with other members of staff within the school. When your students are doing their reading and accessing those books, it is important that they quiz within 24 hours after having finished that book. So access to technology to be able to quiz during the reading time is really important. And for this, you'd only need maybe 1 or 2 laptops or iPads or any device that they can quickly log on, take the quiz, and come off from the computer again. Some schools often schedule the reading time in the ICT suite so that they've got that access to computers. But this could also be a slight distraction because students may spend too much time on the computers and less time reading. So it's important that they're focusing on their books during their reading time and that you're looking at engaged reading. Right, so I mentioned restore layout. So if you're still having any problems with the poll showing on your screen, you can click into that little button in the top right-hand corner to restore your layout. So I've asked about reading logs, and we've come up with different suggestions on how we sharing this, or you'll be sharing this with your students using reading logs. We have some examples that we can share with you in terms of types of reading logs, which will be sent out to you. These have been used in schools as bookmarks that have gone into the books that students are reading. Your Renaissance Place website under Accelerated Reader Resource, you'll also find that there are 4 types of logs within Accelerated Reader that you can access. There are 2 logs for beginning readers who are having assistance and guided reading practice, support with their reading, and then 2 for your independent readers. There's also a log that holds a space for targets that will be set. The reading logs are really important, and also if you're introducing accelerated reading, you've got different teachers supporting your students. You may have a tutor supporting them when reading during form time. You might have a class teacher supporting your students at another time. If your students are carrying reading logs with them, they will be able to then, your teachers will be able to support them by simply looking at the reading log without having a computer in front of them to monitor whether they're keeping up with their daily reading practice, and with the quiz results to assess whether they've been successful on the books that they've read most recently and the levels of those books. So that just once again highlights the importance, and that using the reading log is and does form one of our best practices to be put in place. The next best practice, step 5, would be to check your quiz results immediately. So ensure that when your students are on the computers quizzing, that you have a quick opportunity to touch base with them to find out how well they are doing. Within the system, you'll find that the target for average percent correct is set at 85%. On the odd occasion, this does become confused with the individual quiz results. But when the students are taking individual quizzes, they can really only score 80 or 90% on a 5 or 10 question quiz, or on a 20 question quiz, maybe 75%. So the 85% that you're hearing and seeing in the system is the overall average on the quizzes that they're taking. They may hit 100% on one quiz, 80 on the next, and they may need to get up to another 100% to meet that target of 85%. This information has also come through the study, again, the same study we've run with the 2 million students. We've looked at the data, we've looked at what's needed for optimum success and growth with Accelerated Reader. And you'll find that if students are averaging less than 75% on the quizzes that they're taking, this is a point of concern because they'll be failing too many quizzes, they might not be accessing the correct books within the ZPD range, and you're going to see again that regression and negative dip and growth in results. The minute students start averaging the 75%, you'll start to see the growth coming through. So 75 to 85% average will give you some growth. But the moment you hit 85% and students can maintain that 85% average, this is where you will see the maximum gains coming through. And this is where you'll see those positive results on your STAR reading tests. On the odd occasion, we had schools come to us saying, but why am I not seeing the growth in the STAR test? Why is this not working? And when we go back to the Accelerated Reader results, we may find that students are not quite meeting the 85% average, or they may not be reading for the minimum of 15 minutes per day. So that is quite important to see and measure the success within Accelerated Reader. Now, I'd like to ask a question. So if you're willing to answer and you have a mic with you, if you can put up the hand or click on the raise hand option on the right-hand side to answer this question. Could you tell me, and you'd notice on the screen that if students are averaging between 95 and 100%, that they won't have as much growth as if they're averaging between 85 and 95%. Could you tell me, just by raising the hands or typing in chat if you don't have access to the mic, but let me know why students will not see that maximum growth coming through if they're averaging at 95% or above. So any ideas on that, and anybody willing to share? I've got one raised hand there from Sarah. Sarah, I'm going to come over to you and open your mic. Good afternoon, Sarah.
Good afternoon.
I can hear you now. Good afternoon. How are you doing?
Fantastic. Very well, thank you. At Chorney here, we've noticed that boys who are scoring between 95 and 100% are generally choosing books from the lower end of their ZPD. So they're not really challenging themselves to really stretch their mind or grow their brains to actually understand or what they're reading or to grow their vocabulary. So that's when we see 95 to 100% in correct questions or as an average, we start setting them challenges to read from the top end of their ZPD.
Fantastic. Do you have them going straight up to the top end of the ZPD or just?
No, we look at where it is they're quizzing at that point and then move it to the next level up. So if they've got a ZPD from 2 to 5 and they're quizzing on books that are at the 2 to 3 level, we'll say, right, no more 2 to 3, aim for 4 and go from there, and let's see how you get off on with those ones, just to set them that little bit of extra challenge.
Very good. Fantastic. Thank you for your feedback, Sarah. Thank you. Okay, I can see that. Kathy, I'm going to come over to you. You've also raised your hand. Hi, Kathy.
Hello.
Hello there. Hi. What do you have to share with us?
We've experienced the same thing, really. It's pupils choosing books which are too easy, that are at the bottom end of their ZPD. So they're successful on the quizzes, which they like, but it's not really fulfilling the purpose of stretching them and developing their vocabulary, etc.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Kathy. Thank you. Absolutely. So it's good to hear from the experience that you've had in school, and you've touched on it exactly as I would have, in terms of the fact that you've been guiding your students further, using the quiz results as a guide to ensure that they are meeting the correct level of challenge, and that if they're not being challenged enough, then we won't see that growth because they're reading the books that are far too easy. We've had some feedback in chat as well, agreeing with what's been said. saying that students become competitive to get the points. Absolutely, Brian. They chase after those points to win those prizes, and they're not being challenged enough. And when it comes to points and the book length, what would be good is to encourage them to then attempt a longer book to gain more points by the time they take the quiz. And this might also set up a new challenge. But it is important to always ensure that they're reading at the correct and best suited place within the ZPD range. And Mandy's also saying that pupils may not be reading books at the higher end of the ZPD, also dipping down to the lower end, and you'd encourage them to progress up a few levels to extend the challenge most definitely. Right, so that is important, using those quiz results as a guide and always steering your students and encouraging your students to meet that target of 85%. When it comes to checking those quiz results, you have the TOPS report, and TOPS stands for the opportunity to praise the student. And I mentioned that I've been with the company for quite a few years, and then when I came into the company, we just introduced the web-based version of Renaissance Place. So the TOPS report has actually come a long way with the software and still exists within the software. It gives you a lovely summary of what the student has read. It provides you with the quiz results in the book that they've just completed, allowing you to see the number of points they've earned, success they've had, whether it's fiction or non-fiction. It also gives you the word count on the book that they've just completed. Lower down, it provides you with a summary of the school year to date, including any targets you may have set, and further down on the report you find a summary for the full school year. So there's lots of information on that TOPS report that you can use to praise your students. You could say, well done on the 1.2 million words you've read for the school year, or well done on the words you've just read on this book. Well done on meeting your targets. Now, this can be generated on screen after your students have taken their quiz, but if you're running out of time, you can have a quick overview of the general results using the progress. So you'll see the progress tab on the student's login. Can I ask you, just out of an indication of who's been viewing student screens, could you give me a tick if you've seen the screen before when your students have logged in? So when your students have logged in, taken their quiz, have you directed your students to click onto progress, or have you seen the progress tab? Just a little tick if you have. Right. Seeing again some ticks and crosses coming through. Fantastic, quite a few ticks. Right. Using this information, again, you can encourage your students to meet that 85% target. You can express the importance of that target, as well as the points that they should be meeting, and ensuring that they're reading well within their range. So you'll find below the bar for average book level, you actually have the ZPD range on screen. So they always have access to that ZPD range when they log in into Accelerated Reader. Step 6 is to take status of the class. The status of the class is our term for having a short chat with your students, just a brief 30 to 60-second chat saying, how are things getting on? Let's look at your results together. What levels are you reading at now? Or catching them after they've taken, immediately after they've taken their quiz, to say, how did you do in that book? What was your score results? How are you managing with your targets? So a lot of what we've previously covered actually ties into taking status of the class. So where we've spoken about ensuring that they're reading for perhaps 30-minute schedule, to ensure that they are reading for a good amount of time each day, to ensure that they're using their reading logs. And during status of the class, you could use the reading logs as an indicator of the progress students are making, or you could ask your students to log into the progress tab on screen. So it's really used to monitor progress, support students in their book selection, support them in meeting the 85% target, ensuring that they know how to read within and select books within the ZPD range. It takes that 30-minute reading lesson that you've now got in your timetable, you may have scheduled into your timetable, and it makes it quite a constructive lesson. So it's not just sitting down, reading with the students, or allowing your students to get on with their reading while you might be doing some marking. It gives you some things that you can do and tools to use to interact with your students. Again, supporting them to reach the maximum potential with accelerated reader and through star reading when we look at the test results. We have a video that you can access, and Terry will send this out to you after our webinar today. But the status of the class video is a teacher actually within a classroom. It's filmed live. It might look staged. It's not staged. It's what the teacher would do with every other status of the reading lesson, taking status of the class. And we've specifically filmed it in the school where this is done very regularly. So do go online, view the video. It doesn't take too long to go through, and take some notes on what would work well for you within your school, things you liked about the video, what you liked, certain things that the teacher had done in terms of the interaction with the student and what types of conversations they are having. When you're taking status of the class, you will be using the next step, which is to review your diagnostic report regularly. So the diagnostic report gives you a host of information, and very often when you first look at this report you think, wow, that's a lot, where do I start? But what we suggest is focusing on 3 columns, and these are the 3 most important columns considering what we've touched on today. The first column, and I do apologize, it's covered up there, but it's your reading practice quizzes. It looks at the number of quizzes taken by the student and, more importantly, the number of quizzes passed. It then gives you the average % correct for the student against the target of 85%. And the third most important column would be engaged time. And this is where we're looking for that minimum of 15 minutes of engaged time. But ideally, once you have your students up to the 25 minutes, with an average of 85%, that's where you should see the results coming through on star reading. So looking at this report, we have Donald as a star student because he's taken 12 quizzes, passed all 12. He's averaging just on 85%, and his engaged time is at 37 minutes. Something to note about this engaged time is that it's calculated based on the quiz results. It looks at the student's individual ZPD range, so considers what levels they should be reading at, looks at what levels they are reading at, the quiz results, and the length of time that you're reporting on. So you could report on a half term, a term, but it will take into account the length of time that you're viewing your data. So if this is about 4 months, and if we looked at Ellen lower down, Ellen's taken 1 quiz over those 4 months, done a good 90% on that quiz, achieved 90%, well done. However, as it's only 1 quiz on a very short book, Ellen has been reading for 0 minutes. So considering that it was such a short book and the length of time, there's been less than 1 minute of reading per day, and that being engaged constructive reading. Right, so this is a very good report to access. We would recommend that you look at it during your reading lessons. So with every lesson that you have, if not, view the report at least once a week at a bare minimum. If you haven't yet gone into it, have a look at it once a month, review the data, assess where your students are at, and look at the data so that you can do something with it. And what we'd recommend doing is annotating a report so that you can intervene promptly, and that would be step 8 in your best practices. So where your students have been putting all this effort into quizzing, and you've got this amount of data that you can go through, take that data and use it to then support your students. Annotating the report can be done quite simply. You simply generate the report, have 3 highlighters at hand, maybe use pink to highlight students that may be a concern, yellow to highlight those that are struggling, and green for those students that are doing very well, they're on target, and they're meeting that 85% average with a good amount of engaged time. Could I ask you to possibly send in chat and let me know why we have a big concern for those students that are highlighted in pink? So if you look at the pink highlights, can you quickly type through and let me know why we've highlighted those students in pink? I'm just waiting for some responses to come through. I have no quizzes taken. Mandy, you were quite quick on the computer there. Donna, Sally, fantastic. So you've quickly picked up that there are 0 quizzes taken. And again, depending on your time frame, your first goal that you're looking at is getting everybody onto the system and getting 100% participation from your students so that you can ensure that they are reading. So with that, looking at the information, you want to assess what length of book are they reading, how far are they in those novels, do they have quite a thick novel, how have they gone on with that novel, and say to your students, so when do you think you'll finish this book? By when can I expect to see a quiz result? And give them something to work towards so that they're not sitting with that thick novel for 2 terms, and when you're going into your spring term, there's still no quiz results from your students. Or suggest that they try a quick read while going through that longer book, which could be a short non-fiction book. But give them something else to read so that you can see that activity coming through, and we can start to see quiz results. Fantastic. We have some students in yellow, and they might be struggling, and we can see these 2 students, Mez and James. They averaging 77 and 73%. They are quizzing, but they're failing a number of those quizzes. And they do have good reading time. So despite the fact that they're reading very well, they might not be reading well for comprehension. So we want to find out what are they reading, are they accessing the best suited books, and maybe they need some strategies, good strategies for comprehension to support them. And on this annotated report, you might not see it, but the notes that have been put to, or actions to be put with that student would be to give them some comprehension strategies. If they're reading longer novels, have them put some notes on post-it notes and stick that into the book. And before they go online to take the quiz, ensure that they read through those post-it notes, just to reinforce what they've read previously and to have them think about what they've read before going online to take the quiz. So do take that into consideration. Okay, step 9 would be to set your reading practice targets. And I know this is a step later on in the implementation that when you set off and are excited about getting Accelerated Reader up and running, by the time you've had it going for a term or 2, the targets could be forgotten. So do make a note to set these reading practice targets. If you're new to Accelerated Reader, you could set them up at the start of your first term or wait till 1 term has passed. Targets for book levels and points can only be set after students have taken the STAR reading test. So to go through the key targets, the first is average percent correct, and we've discussed the importance of that 85%. And the system will default that target to 85% for you. You then have the points target, which is based on the ZPD range. So it's a personalized target for each of your students. Lastly, you have the book level target. We do recommend that you set this target at the starting point of the ZPD range. And the reasoning behind this is that if you were to set it in the middle of the range or towards the top end of the range, students could become quite ambitious at the challenge and jump at books that are towards the top end of the range and a little bit too challenging for them at that point in time. Once they've done that, it becomes quite difficult to then pull them back and say, well, I need you to read books at a lower level, and it could be quite demotivating. So start them off at the low end of the range. They can always surpass that target, and they can always see how far they've come from the beginning end of the ZPD range. And if you look at the example on screen, we can see that the student has surpassed the average percent correct target. They are 94.7%. They're near the end of their points target, which is set at 33 points, and they've currently earned 29.3 points. And they have surpassed the book level target, which was set at the starting point of the ZPD range. When students are going through the term and you're looking at having that conversation after they've taken the quiz, if you are halfway through a half term and you've set your targets for the half term, you should find that target should line up in the middle of the bar. When you come into the end of the term, what the student has achieved, especially in points targets, should be towards the top end of that bar. So they're close to achieving their target by the end of the half term. You can also use this to motivate your students with the word count and to look at the percentage of fiction novels or books that they're reading. This will lighten and work out the percentage of fiction and non-fiction. If students are only accessing fiction and they're not being challenged enough, you may want to then direct them to the non-fiction text. Right? The final step is motivating your students, ensuring that they're staying on track and feeling excited about Accelerated Reader. I find that very often there's a big burst of enthusiasm when students first come to take their quizzes, and they may quiz on everything that they can remember, especially with Year 7. You'll see all the Roald Dahl books come through. You may see Cat in the Hat, you may see The Gruffalo, and possibly Goldilocks and the Three Bears. And you may see multiple students quizzing on their stories, just trying to get in there, do some quizzes, because they really do enjoy the quizzing aspect of things. And you've got one or two options here. You could either say, well, let's not go back to the past. Let's start afresh. Let's look at new books. What excites you? What do you want to read now? Because if you want to do well with this, we need you to have read something more recently. We need you to have read something within the last week or two, and you quiz on it straight away so you can have those good results. And that immediately puts into place some good quizzing habits. Alternatively, if you've missed that and your students have quizzed on everything they can think of, you could say, right, get it out of your system. While you're doing that, I need to know what books you have in your hands within your ZPD range. When will I expect to see those quiz results? What works very well with schools that are new to Accelerated Reader or incoming Year 7 students is actually to pick up a short book and read it aloud to your students. This may sound unusual within secondary schools, but students do enjoy it. And it helps to really get them on board, just as a first practice to get them into the system, to take the quiz and to feel comfortable with the quizzing. Find a very short book. You're looking at 30 pages, large text. Could be non-fiction or fiction. Could be something fun. Read it out aloud and then get your students into an ICT suite or in front of a device to take that quiz straight away. From that, you should see that immediate motivation come through. You can also then say to them at that point, well, now let's go and select your next book. What are you going to read to quiz on next? And get that all set up and in place. Now, in terms of celebrating successes, there are a range of things that schools have done. We have the word millionaire, which can be tracked quite easily in the system on your word count report. So you could have your millionaires club, and the moment a student becomes a word millionaire, they can join the millionaires club, have their name up on a board. You may want to introduce breakfast with a head teacher or lunch with a head teacher for your millionaires once a half term. We also have one of our schools that have nicely decorated their doors to their form group in preparation of World Book Day. So you can see the teacher all dressed up so nicely for World Book Day, and one of the very creative doors that the students had decorated, and it could be their favorite author, books by their favorite author, or their favorite book that they voted on within the class. With the Christmas tree, it's very good to also tie in Accelerated Reader and your motivators to other themes that you have running within the school. So when you have sports day, you could have sports-themed motivators. You could have a running track along a corridor, maybe a racetrack, and have little pointers on where your different forms are at or different classes are at in the race to meeting targets, the race to 85%. Could be a race to 10 million words for the form, or 1 million words for the class over that term. The Christmas tree idea, the moment students have 100% on a quiz, they'll write their name on the star with the books that they've quizzed on and scored 100% and put that up onto the Christmas tree. And in the lead up before the Christmas break, those stars are taken down off the tree, put into a big hat, and you could do a prize draw. Another option over Easter. Easter is a good time to use chocolate as a prize, which is quite easy to do. So there are different things that you could do there as well. One of our schools had a great idea of having 70 envelopes. And within each envelope, there'd be different prizes. And it could be books, it could be stationery, it could be that had cinema tickets in there. And when students meet, Brian says chocolates anytime. When students meet their target, they can select an envelope and have a mystery prize coming out of the envelope. And that's a good one to do when you're ready to introduce your targets. There's a range of different ideas. There's so many easy things you could do as well. If you stretch for your budget, you might want to have the golden ticket to the front of the lunch queue, which you could give out once a week to different students, the students that have achieved certain targets. And you could use so many different things to motivate your students. Your first term could be the first student to the 85% average after they've taken 3 or 4 quizzes. That could be your first prize. So you're pushing that 85%. Then you could look at the students who met their points targets when you introduce your points targets. You could look at the engaged time, and then you can look at your millionaires, word millionaires as well. So use different different factors within the system to award prizes. Keep it mixed up, keep it different every half term so that you can award different students at different times. Change it up every half term so it stays interesting and fun for your students as well. Jess has just posted a cheap idea to ask the school canteen to make pizza lunch for some students and invite students into the kitchen to make their own pizza, which is a less expensive idea. Carol said that what they do is kind of assemblies to celebrate the winners of word counts and quizzes each term. They get bronze merits for meeting those targets, and you have tutor group winners as well, which is fantastic. I'm so pleased that you're sharing your ideas because I was about to ask that you do. If anybody has something different or fun and exciting that has worked really well in their school, would you like to raise your hand and I can come over and open your mic? Or if you do not have access to a mic, you can please type it into this chat room so we can share those fantastic ideas. I see some ideas coming through. Les, hi Les, I'm coming over to you. Do you have something exciting to share with us? Hello Les? No, no sound. Okay, Les, I can't see you. You don't have a mic, I see that. Thank you. Did you type your idea in the chat, or do you have anything that you'd like to share with us in the chat box? Oh, previous question. Okay, you'd asked a question earlier. Okay, Les, I'm going to ask Jess to help you with the previous question. They may have missed that. I do apologize. They will come back to you shortly, Terry or Jess. So there are a range of ideas. They don't all need to be expensive. Ask your students what they would like in terms of prizes. Ask your students for competition ideas. And if you've got them on board, if you have their ideas to work with, you're probably going to get a higher amount of participation from your students. Okay, so thank you for sharing all your motivational ideas. Debbie has just said Olympic medals, which is fantastic. Okay, so Les is asking, how can we make sure we motivate the ones at the bottom who will never achieve millionaire? Fantastic question, Les. You're just asking how to motivate those students. That's where it's important to change your motivating systems and your prize systems. Word millionaire is something you can have running throughout the academic year, but again, if you find that those students that are reading at the lower levels or the shorter books and they're going to struggle to get to that prize or achieve that, you can still award those students on a different way for maybe having read 100,000 words, or you could have a ladder that builds up and starts the first student to have read 10,000 words, and then you could go 100,000 words. You could also have your quarter millionaires and build it up over time. Alternatively, you'd need to reward your students at the lower level slightly differently. And this is where points targets and average percent correct and book level is so important, because all students can meet those targets irrespective of what level they're reading at. So when you're setting those points targets, your students at the lower abilities could be the first to achieve those targets because of their will to want to push along and their dedication to achieving their targets. You can also award your most improved student. So when you come back to look at your star results, if you find that you have a student who's done really well, they don't need to be the top student, but they could show the most amount of growth or dedication in what they've put into Accelerated Reader and the growth coming through in star reading, you can award those students without saying why or what, but simply saying this is our most improved student, or we have 3 most improved students. So within the software, there is always something to award all students of all abilities, and that's why it does work so well across the school. Okay, you may have some other responses coming through to you there that would be useful as well. So have a look at, let's have a look at some of the comments that may be helpful that have come through there. Great. So what we're going to look at, we've come to the end of the 10 best practices, and we're just on our time. We do have a lot of attendees, but could I ask if you could, again, use your pointer and have an opportunity to type on screen and simply type one of the best practices that are either new to you or that you feel you would put in place that you haven't previously looked into or set up as yet. And if you haven't found a space on the screen, you could type this into your chat box as well. So let us know through chat if you haven't found space on the screen. Jesse shared a great idea to reward the students who break the barrier when they move up a ZPD range, or when they've retested and you found that the ZPD range has moved up. I like Angela's superhero theme that they run in this term. So that's in the prizes. That's fantastic. Okay, so if you can type Word Millionaire Awards, somebody else, I can't see who's commented on that, but thank you. That's something that you put in place. I like setting the certificate levels. Great to add a greater challenge. Sarah, definitely. The certificates are good, and we will be sending you a guide on setting your targets as well as certification levels, where the system produces certificates for you that you can simply hand out to your students. Annotating the diagnostic report and using the data, fantastic. Mary, thank you for sharing the word millionaires that you'll be using. Certificates. Thank you, Shelley, for attending. I hope that you're going away with something new. Right, I'm seeing lots of arrows, but I cannot see the text coming through as yet. So if you have typed something, please click away or click elsewhere on the screen so that the text will come up. Oh, Debbie, you're with us. I can see you typing. It's coming through. How do you keep a record of all the books the pupils read? That would be, Mohammed, that would be your reading log that you would use to keep a record of all the books that they read through, but the system does keep a record as well. So provided they've quizzed on the book, like I said, you've said the books they've read, but if they've read the book and not quizzed on it, we won't have that record. If they are reading accelerated reader books, when your students go into their view of the system where we looked at the progress on screen, there's an option to click onto the bookshelf. When they go into the bookshelf, it will have a full record of the books they've read, each of those results month by month. So it's your bookshelf within your students' login. Mary has commented to say that she'll be setting targets for the individual students now. Fantastic to maintain motivation. And Mary, we will be sending you a guide on how to set those targets. Really good. Carol's just commented, Mohammed, Carol's commented on that virtual bookshelf that your students will see when they log in. So when they log in and they go to their bookshelf, that provides a lot of motivation for them to see what they've read, and it also recommends some other books within the genre. Coming back to some of what you've shared, you'll use the ZPD range to inform book choice, more inclusive reward scheme, fantastic. 100% wall of names of students who got the 100%, great, Vicky. And structured library lessons using the data. Fantastic. I'm very excited to see that you could identify those 10 practices and find one that will work to further your implementation of Accelerated Reader and to get the most out of this product that you've invested in to see your students succeed. So thank you all for your feedback. Thank you so much for sharing with us, sharing your best practices with all other schools. We really appreciate that. We have come up to our time, so we will be closing the webinar shortly, but before we do, we'll hang around if you have any further questions. If you'd like to verbally ask a question, please raise a hand and I can open the mic. If there's anything you'd like to type into the chat box, go ahead and do so, but we've just on our time, so if you do need to leave the webinar room, thank you so much for attending. You can simply click on File and Leave Room, or close down your computer screen or the window for the webinar. So once again, thank you for attending. We do have future webinars coming up, so if you go onto our implementation timeline on our website, I've just brought that up. The implementation timeline will give you a step-by-step guide on where you should be at with your implementation from when you've started Accelerated Reader. That's where you'd find the webinar information and information on any upcoming webinars that we'll be running in September. We'll also be running countrywide workshops that you may want to attend, which will be at a local school, so keep an eye out for those. The implementation timeline will be sent out to you in a follow-up email. Please contact customer services if you have any further queries. But thank you again for your time. Really appreciate it. Hope you've gone away with something new. And all the best with the weeks that you have leading up to the summer holidays. And enjoy your summer break when it arrives. Thank you very much. Vicky, I see you have a question. I'm going to come over to you and open